Hello, fake football party animals. Welcome to the Week 4 Starts and Sits here at the Fake Football. I'm Greg Smith at Greg's Us on Twitter. I'll be your host once again for this week's slate of start and sit recommendations. Let's get right to the review for last week's picks. We'll start at QB. Not a great week, not a terrible week. Cam Newton was a great call. He was QB3, almost 30 points there. Phil Rivers, not so great. Phil, what happened, buddy? That Chargers offense I was buying in. It was kind of a mess for Rivers and Stevie Johnson. At least Keenan Allen got his. Alex Smith, in the end, ended up being an okay call. QB11, about 19 points, but he was pretty bad in that game, and I was really regretting that call for the first half and basically most of that game altogether. It did turn out that garbage time was friendly to Mr. Smith, and he delivered on that and finished with a reasonable QB start. But that was part of the process. That's part of why I liked him last week. But I didn't envision him playing so poorly in the first half, and he showed me something. I'll be a little hesitant to use him in games future where the game flow might not be quite in his favor. Nick Foles disappointed a lot of streamers. If you want to hear a good rant about Nick Foles, go listen to JJ Zacharyson on the Living the Stream podcast. He had a nice little clearing of the throat regarding his call on Nick Foles. I mean, I was on board. I think I had him at QB 16, but I did recommend him as a starter in 2 QB leagues. He finishes QB 28. That's not good enough. So it's kind of a bummer. That's how it goes. Jameis Winston, QB 21. Again, not great, but for 2 QB leagues, that's usable. That's where you need to be. On the sit side, Colin Kaepernick was a good call. He only scored 5.3 points, finishing outside the top 30 at QB. Sam Bradford also had a poor game, QB 26. Andy Dalton, though, man, QB 2. He even beat out Cam Newton with over 30 points. I may have to start respecting that Cincinnati passing game a little bit more. They have a nice opportunity this week. We'll get to that against the Chiefs later. But with that said, the Bengals' schedule is about to get a lot tougher, and so Andy Dalton may not keep up this pace. If you do have him on your team, now might be a good time to sell high. Matthew Stafford, QB 25, only 8.6 points. Not great there. Drew Brees didn't play, so we can't take a whole lot of credit for that. But hopefully, based upon my recommendation, tried to find a different QB option anyway leading up to Sunday. Let's get to the running backs next. Melvin Gordon didn't do much, RB 40, 5 points. Dion Lewis was a nice call. It does look like the Patriots are just going to use him fairly heavily every week. I think he's a top 20 back moving forward. He's probably graduated from the starts and sits territory in general. He might just be an every week starter at this point. Devontae Freeman, RB number 1, that was a good call. A lot of people were on him, especially in daily fantasy where his price was very, very reasonable. But if you were using him in redraft leagues, good for you. You had a great week from him. David Johnson didn't do very well, only 3.5 points for an RB 51 finish. It just seems like they're going to be a timeshare there. And Chris Johnson was very good in that game against the Bears, so I think I just picked the wrong running back for the right reasons, if that makes any sense. Fred Jackson was kind of contingent on Marshawn Lynch not playing. He played a little bit, but Thomas Rawls was the real beneficiary there, and that was just a misread by me. I thought that they would give more work to the veteran. But now we see how that's going to play out. In theory, if Lynch can't go again on this week's game on Monday night, Rawls will be the guy who you want to play, not necessarily Fred Jackson. The sit calls, Lamar Miller was a nice one. He only finished as RB 33. DeMarco Murray didn't play. Again, can't really take too much credit for those. Todd Gurley, as suspected, was used in a very limited role, only scoring 1.4 points. Bishop Sankey was overtaken by Antonio Andrews. That's not too good, buddy. So yeah, Bishop Sankey probably off the fantasy radar at this point. Joey Bell does not look good. He salvaged his day, I think, with a goal line touchdown, but I do think Amir Abdullah is the only really startable commodity in that Lions backfield going forward. In PPR leagues, you might even have to give more consideration to Theo Riddick than to Bell. With that said, Bell is going to be the goal line back, it looks like, at least from time to time. So there will be weeks where he scores points. Just good luck forecasting that. Wide receivers. This tends to be where we do the best. Brandon Marshall, wide receiver 14. Jeremy Maclin, wide receiver 8. Dante Moncrief, 31, but 9.2 points is respectable. Kendall Wright, wide receiver 11. James Jones, wide receiver 9. Kenny Britt, wide receiver 22. All of those were nice calls. Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse. It was probably bad to recommend them both. Jimmy Graham was the guy who really put up those points in the Seattle passing game. Jermaine Kearse had an okay day, wide receiver 40, 7.5 points about. But it was probably foolish to recommend both these guys at the same time. You're going to have to kind of roll the dice with one or the other on a week-to-week basis. It's unlikely in that offense that both of these guys are going to be able to produce, a high volume of fantasy points on a weekly basis. On the sit side, we did fairly well. Brandon Cooks, Golden Tate, both outside of the top 35 wide receivers. Alshon Jeffrey didn't play. Roddy White did play, but again scored the big goose egg, 0 points. What is up with Roddy? Who knows? You can't start him. Just stay away until, you see signs of life. Charles Johnson, similarly, he was a sit for me 2 weeks in a row, and now he's hurt, so stay away from him. Marcus Wheaton, wide receiver 86. That isn't too difficult of a call to make. He's just not that good. Travis Benjamin, wide receiver 34 with 8.5 points. So I think I underestimated Benjamin. I underestimated how much the Browns want to use him. And going forward, he'll be a little bit higher in my ranks because of that. I still don't like him, on a week-to-week basis, if only because he does seem like such a high-variance player. And with McCown at quarterback there, I don't know how many, accurate throws Benjamin's going to see. Tight ends, Kyle Rudolph, Jared Cook, not very good on the week. Both scored fewer than 2 points. Eric Ebron, on the other hand, scored 6 points for tight end 12. Brandon Myers was just a dart throw, a flyer that you could have taken. He finished as wide receiver 32. On the sit side, Martellus Bennett, tight end. I think I might have been saying wide receiver for these guys, but Martellus Bennett, tight end 35, 1.5 points. Owen Daniels actually had a nice game. Tight end 9 with 8.8 points. Ben Watson and Josh Hill not doing much. When it comes to projecting these tight ends, I'm really trying to avoid recommending the obvious starters, the clear, top 5, top 10 guys week to week. And I'm trying to, discourage against certain guys in that regard. Bennett was a good call last week. Daniels was not. But I'm going to miss a lot on tight end. That's the point I'm trying to make. All right, so with last week's review out of the way, let's get to this week's picks, starts, and sits using our Game Flowbotics spreadsheet once again. I've made a couple more improvements here. One thing you'll notice is some of the information is incomplete. I've had a very busy week, and I will have this stuff up to date by game time on Sunday, hopefully, by tomorrow, Friday, when this goes up. But as I'm recording this on Thursday night, I have not had time to complete all of the spreadsheet. I do have all the DVOA numbers in here and the Vegas lines. Anyway, let's get right to it. The Jets going to Miami. Pretty high over-under for this game, especially considering how good the Jets' defense has been. And, we expect the Miami defense to be pretty good. The Jets are slight favorites here on the road. I don't really know what to make of that. What I am going to take from this game is this Jets defense still being very good. And for that, I'm fading a lot of the Miami Dolphins. Ryan Tannehill, Lamar Miller, Jordan Cameron are all sits for me. Cameron in particular is a guy that I originally had ranked right around tight end 6, tight end 7, just because he seems like somewhat matchup proof based on his ability, but the injury and then looking at some of the points against numbers for tight ends, specifically with the Jets, has me worried about Cameron this week. Tannehill, similarly, is very far down my rankings relative to where he would normally be at QB. I wouldn't be surprised if these guys outperform my expectations, but with that said, I'm worried enough to fade them at least for 1 week against a solid defense. For 2 quarterback leagues, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think, is quarterback number 15 for me this week. He's in that range, so he's a starter. I like him to do pretty well. I think he's actually just 1 spot ahead of Ryan Tannehill. The difference being that most people who have Tannehill drafted him to be, a starter at least, half the time, if not all the time for their roster. Whereas Fitzpatrick was probably a bench guy, even in 2 QB leagues, but I think you can deploy him this week safely. Let's move on to Jacksonville and Indianapolis. Indy, big favorites at home here, over under 48. So this tells us that the Jags are not favored to score too many points, only maybe about 20 points in this game. I still like Blake Bortles as a deep play, 2-quarterback, maybe 16-team league if you're hurting at QB. They're going to have to throw to keep up with Indy, and garbage time doesn't always equate to success for QBs, but I do think that Indianapolis defense, which in terms of DVOA is ranked 23rd against the pass, is a good opportunity for Bortles to put up some numbers in this game. I'm also using Moncrief and Fleener for the Colts. I mean, Andrew Luck, I think, is a no-brainer start if you own him. I mean, that's why you drafted him. Similarly, T.Y. Hilton, if you drafted him, you're probably playing him. Although I do like Moncrief more on a week-to-week basis. Moncrief just has more touchdown upside. On the sit side, Andre Johnson, the dude just looks washed up. I don't think you can use him. Kind of similar to the Roddy White situation. Avoid him, until we see something better from him. He just doesn't look healthy or, spry enough to maintain the level of production that we've come to expect from him in fantasy football. Moving now to the Giants and the Bills. Bills almost 6-point favorites at home here. 46 on the total, not extremely high, but pretty high for, again, a matchup with at least one very good defense and another defense that's, not the worst. The Giants are okay. I'm not fading anyone in particular here in this game. There's no one who falls, that far below where I would normally rank them to note. But I do like most of the Bills in this matchup. Tyrod, man, he was awesome in week 3. And the New York Giants, their pass defense isn't very good. 21st in the league in terms of DVOA. I think Tyrod's going to have another pretty good week. He's inside my top 10 at QBs. Carlos Williams looks like he's going to start in place of LaShawn McCoy. The matchup isn't great. The Giants have actually been pretty good against the run, but I think based on volume and the talent level of Carlos Williams, you need to start him if you own him. Percy Harvin, with Sammy Watkins looking like he's going to be dinged up or maybe even just out of this game. Harvin is going to be the number 1 receiver for the Bills, and I think if you own him, you have to start him too. Let's get now to the Panthers and the Buccaneers. Panthers 3-point road favorites. A lot of action came in on them at that line. Nobody really likes Tampa Bay here in terms of Vegas. The over/under is super low, so don't expect a ton of scoring here. I don't think anyone equates to be an awesome start ahead of where they would normally go. I am going to sit Doug Martin in most places where I have him. Running back is so thin, you might not be able to sit guys like Martin. You might have drafted him as your RB2, and then based on other injuries, even if you've made a couple savvy pickups, Doug Martin might be a guy you have to consider using this weekend. And I don't like the matchup against the Panthers, but so yeah, if you can find a better option, I'd advise you to do it. The Carolina guys are going to be fine here. I just don't think that you can rate them that much higher than you would in any given week. Cam Newton, Ted Ginn, those guys are usable. Greg Olsen is, a no-brainer start at tight end. Let's go to Philly and Washington next. Philly road favorites. I don't know if I trust that, but a lot of money came in on them. They're vig as minus 125. I'm going to start Jordan Reed against him. I think that, he's kind of graduated into every week starter status, but I'm going to highlight him one more time here as a guy you want to be playing probably weekly and definitely this week. On the sit side, I'm afraid of Sam Bradford and Zach Ertz for the Eagles. Bradford, hasn't proven that he is the QB1 that we wanted him to be when we thought we were getting a value in our drafts. Alfred Morris is another guy I'm saying to sit this week. Between Matt Jones and the tough matchup, I don't think you want to use him. The Eagles are 8th against the run in terms of DVOA. Washington also very good against the run, so I don't think that DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews are great starts here. But with that said, with the Eagles favored, even on the road, it's possible that one of those Eagles running backs, especially if DeMarco was healthy, could get it going this week, although I couldn't blame you for using him. Again, running back is pretty rough these days. Let's get to Oakland and Chicago. The Raiders going in to face the hapless Bears defense, worst in the league defense, and as you might suspect, I'm in on the Raiders. Derek Carr, Latavius Murray, Michael Crabtree, all starts for me. Amari Cooper's on that list too, but again, he's kind of an obvious choice. Dig a little deeper with Crabtree. He's getting the targets, and Derek Carr is, shown improvement. I'm not going to say to avoid all Bears, but what Bears do you really want to use in this game? If you have Forte, you're playing him. Martellus Bennett, kind of like Greg Olsen, is the guy you have to start. He has a great matchup here against Oakland, but I don't think if you had Bennett, there was any question whether you were starting him or not. But yeah, that Bears defense should give up a lot of points. When was the last time Oakland was favored on the road, right? So yeah, get these guys in your lineup if you got them. Houston and Atlanta are next. Atlanta is almost a touchdown favorite at home here. But a little bit of extra money came in on the Houston side of that line. I don't think that means a whole lot. The over-under is nice here, 46.5. Nice relative to what is going to be a low-scoring week otherwise. I don't have any particular starts and sits here. The guys that you would normally play, you're playing them. Julio, DeAndre Hopkins. I would probably not use Arian Foster unless he's very clearly active, and maybe if he gets a practice in on Friday. But yeah, I don't think you want any part of the Houston backfield. The Atlanta rushing defense isn't that great, 25th in DVOA, but I don't know. It just seems like they bounce between their different backs too much, whether it's Chris Polk or Jonathan Grimes or Alfred Blue. I mean, if you're going to start one, Blue's the guy. But if Foster plays, that muddies the situation even further, and you want to avoid that if you can. The Chiefs and the Bengals are up next. The Bengals, man, looking good. Andy Dalton, I'm going to say start him this week. Him and Gio Bernard and Marvin Jones, I'm basically in on the Bengals passing attack. And the primary reason for that is that the Chiefs are very stout against the run. Third in DVOA. I mean, the Bengals are second in DVOA. With that said, I don't think you can sit Jamal Charles if you got him. I am going to recommend sitting Alex Smith, going on the road against a pretty good defense. Altogether, the Bengals defense ranks 7th in terms of DVOA and DAVE, which is the one that accounts for the preseason projections. The Bengals defense is legit. Alex Smith, even in a softer matchup last week against the Packers, there was some garbage time where he picked up that production like we talked about earlier. But here in a tougher matchup, I'm going to say sit him. We've got the Browns going into San Diego to face the Chargers next. Chargers are heavy favorites in this game. Melvin Gordon is going to be a start for me. The Browns are very bad against the rush. So are the Chargers, for that matter. With that said, I don't know if Isaiah Crowell is a guy you necessarily want to use here, if only because I would fear for game script. Based upon this Vegas line, it seems like the Chargers are likely to win this game in convincing fashion, and if that happens, the Browns are going to have to chuck it to play catch up. With that said, you might expect Gary Barnidge to be a value play here at tight end for me. I'm going to go the other way. I'm saying sit him this week. I think that what he did last week against that Raiders is mostly indicative of that Oakland secondary. In this matchup against the Chargers, he might have a harder time finding open spots. And again, I really have a hard time trusting either of the McCowns, especially in a matchup like this where they're bound to be pretty big underdogs. Green Bay and San Francisco are next. Green Bay is a really heavy road favorite, 9 points, over under 48.5. So there should be some scoring in this game. I think, you're going to play all the normal names for Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers, Randall Cobb. James Jones is a start for me, 2 weeks in a row here. He might just be getting up to every week's starter status, especially as long as Devontae Adams is, dinged up. James Jones is an easy start call. On the flip side, Torrey Smith, Ty Montgomery, Vernon Davis, these are guys I'm avoiding. I mean, Smith could go off in any given week, but, the Packers have actually been pretty good against the pass. They rank 6th in DVOA. I'm sure that has a little bit to do with, the game script that they can create with their high-powered offense. But I'm still staying away from Torrey Smith. There's just too much potential for, a 1 or 0 catch game. Vernon Davis, I would like this matchup normally, but I'm thinking that just the injury concerns are a little too much for me to, take on that risk. I would avoid him and try to find somebody better at tight end. And there are a lot of options, Charles Clay, a lot of those kind of mid-tier tight ends that seem to be showing up a little bit better that don't have the same concerns that Davis does. Montgomery, if I like James Jones and I like, all the other Packers, why don't I like Montgomery? Well, I don't know. I just don't know if he's a big enough part of this offense yet. I have a feeling that it'll be easy enough for Rodgers to throw to James Jones and to Randall Cobb and to hand off to Eddie Lacy that Montgomery might not get much work here. I could be wrong. He could score a touchdown or get open for a big play, but I would, stick to the bread and butter players for Green Bay this week. St. Louis and Arizona next, NFC West matchup. Arizona pretty big favorites at home here, 7 points. I'm going to say start John Brown. I think last week I said he had graduated into every week start category. But, I think after some subpar production, of no fault of his own, everyone will tell you about the pass interference penalties that he's drawing. But this is just a reminder that John Brown is fine. You're going to want to use him, I think, every week for the most part. And this is a tough matchup. The Rams are 9th in DVOA against the pass. But, Brown is an excellent receiver. The Cardinals seem to be firing on all cylinders. And, I think you're still going to want to use him. The running backs in this game worry me. I'm going to say stay away from Todd Gurley yet again. Part of that has to do with, that stout Arizona defense, 7th in DVOA against the rush. But also just the fact that it does seem like there's just a timeshare going on in St. Louis. And I don't think you want to dive in on any particular piece of that until maybe one guy asserts himself as the go-to back. I do think Gurley's going to be that guy. I just don't think he's there yet. Andre Ellington, similarly, just out of injury concerns and platoon concerns, I don't think you can use him this week, even if, he's healthy enough to be active. We'll go next to Minnesota and Denver. Denver 7-point favorites, a total of 43, so expect a low-scoring affair here. This means that the Vikings are not going to be likely to put up a ton of points in this game. Sit Teddy Bridgewater. I don't think you want to use Mike Wallace. We've already talked about how Charles Johnson is basically unusable until he shows us something. On the start side, the Vikings are not very good against the rush, 23rd in DVOA. I think that bodes well for C.J. Anderson in general, but that turf toe injury, he's not the first victim of it, Anderson. It slows everyone down. It always lingers longer than you'd expect. I do think that Ronnie Hillman, if you're really, digging deep, stretching for a running back starter, Hillman is a nice option this week if you're taking a flyer. You could do worse. He scored a touchdown last week. If Anderson, aggravates his injury or, can't stay on the field yet again, Hillman's going to get work. And if Denver goes up big in this game, they're going to want to run it to, keep that clock going. So give Hillman some consideration if you, have him and you might be hurting at running back otherwise. And I just realized that I have Kyle Rudolph listed here as a start under the Dallas-New Orleans game, but, he's supposed to be a start here in Minnesota and Denver. I'll fix that on the spreadsheet, but why I'm fading Teddy Bridgewater, why am I not fading Kyle Rudolph? Well, it has to do with the fact that Denver has not really covered the tight end very well, and I do expect the Vikings to have to throw. I think that bodes poorly for Bridgewater. He might throw interceptions, right? But Rudolph, as his most trusted receiver and the guy who works the middle of the field away from those elite Denver cornerbacks. I tried this strategy last week and it didn't really pay off that well, but I'm going to try it again here. Bank on the tight end facing the Broncos to at least put up, usable numbers. And Rudolph's that guy, even if he is listed under our next matchup, which is Dallas and New Orleans. Let's go there next. There's no spread for this game currently, no over-under, basically because we don't know if Drew Brees is going to play. I expect he's not going to play, and even if he does, I don't think that changes things too much for me. I'm starting Joseph Randle. That rushing defense for the New Orleans Saints isn't terrible, 18th in the league, but it's not great. And I think with Whedon at quarterback for Dallas, they're going to want to lean on Randle again like they did last week against the Falcons. On the sit side, Brandon Cooks, Terrence Williams, this is just an acknowledgement that the quarterbacks in this game are not very trustworthy. And even their number one receivers, while Cooks was okay last week, I don't think you can expect, the type of performance that you might have drafted him for, if that makes sense. Terrence Williams, similarly, is the number one receiver for Dallas in theory, but with Whedon at quarterback, I don't know if he's a guy you want to use. I think you could probably find a better option elsewhere. Final matchup, Monday Night Football, Detroit going into Seattle. Seattle 10-point favorites, a low over under 43 points. Man, just stay away from the Lions in general. Matthew Stafford, Golden Tate. I'm a little worried about Calvin Johnson. I mean, normally he's a top 10 guy for me. I think I have him at 14 or 15 at wide receiver, and even that might be too high. He has looked slower this year than he has in seasons past. I do have Eric Ebron as a starter, and that mostly has to do with the fact that tight end is just so thin, and there's so few players you can trust I do think that Ebron will be okay, and if Seattle, jumps out to a lead, Stafford's going to have to chuck it, and Ebron's proven that he can put up numbers so far this season. I'm going to say he does it again this week, even in a brutal matchup. I also have Amir Abdullah, ? As a start this week. I don't know if you necessarily want to deploy him, but as we've discussed ad nauseum to this point, running back is kind of ugly, and, Abdullah, he's the best back in Detroit. The coaches hopefully will realize that at some point, and he can catch passes out of the backfield. He can return kicks. He can run the ball very well. Detroit would be smart to use him more, and in a tough matchup like this, to keep the Seattle defense off the field and maybe try to open things up and spare some pressure for Matt Stafford. Abdullah, I'm hoping we'll see more work. I don't think you can necessarily bank on that and make him as a surefire starter this week, but I'm throwing him out there as a potential flex play. If you're thin at running back or thin at flex, Abdullah's a guy you can consider despite the rough matchup. That does it. I kind of breezed through everything. I hope that's okay. It's been a very busy week for me, and I do need to catch up on filling out the rest of the spreadsheet and moving Kyle Rudolph back into his matchup. Thank you all for watching. Good luck in your matchups, and we'll catch you next week. Adios.